Why are Wuthering Heights adaptations never faithful is something people have been asking since it was announced that Emerald Fennell was going to direct a controversial-looking film based on the novel by Emily Brontë. And as more information about this project was released, people have been wondering, not very calmly, if this was going to be a sort of bodice ripper fanfiction of the beloved classic. As a literature graduate, I've been concerned too, so I reread the novel, watched many adaptations, and played the trailer like 50 times to decide if I was worried or excited. But contrary to many people, I tried to walk into the cinema with an open mind, and I have some thoughts. But I've also wondered why people were so passionately concerned about this movie not being faithful when many of the previous adaptations have failed to precisely represent the spirit of the story. Is it because the public is less tolerant of certain inaccuracies? Or is it because people seem to have a particular dislike for anything Emerald Fennell creates? But first of all, we need to talk about one of the main controversies this movie generated. Is Wuthering Heights a love story? Wuthering Heights is a complex novel, and its themes and genre have been widely discussed since its publication. After the release of the trailer of this new movie, many people were scandalized by the presentation of it as the greatest love story of all time. There are several reasons why people argue that Wuthering Heights is not a romance. First of all, they emphasize that Heathcliff and Catherine are horrible characters. They're selfish, spiteful, aggressive, they destroy their own lives and the lives of others. But does that prevent them from loving each other? I don't think so. However, this isn't a specific issue of Wuthering Heights, but of how romance is conceived as a genre in general. As I mentioned in a previous video, there is a very schematic idea of romances as stories about lovely people who live happily ever after. The public also associates romance with simple and cute stories for readers to evade their complicated and boring lives. Therefore, many can comprehend that there are interesting romances that explore the complexities of love in relation to other relevant aspects of human experience, such as class or race, for example. I'm not saying that Wuthering Heights is just a romance. This is a complex story influenced by Romanticism and the Gothic aesthetic, which includes many themes such as class, lineage, education, violence, revenge, and so much more. But all of that is intrinsically and undeniably related to love. But does that make it the greatest love story of all time? An adaptation of an adaptation. Everyone seems to be very angry about the presentation of Wuthering Heights as a love story, and they're acting as if Emerald Fennell is the first person ever to come up with this interpretation. But of course, that's not right. Fennell is participating in a cinematic tradition started by the 1939 film, which has greatly shaped the popular conception of Wuthering Heights. Her adaptation explicitly references the 1939 film multiple times. Some examples are the old Hollywood-inspired poster, sets like the garden in the Grange, and scenes like the final one where Heathcliff embraces Cathy on her deathbed. Some people have also been upset about the erasure of the second part of the book. There, we really see Heathcliff's untamed desire for vengeance and cruelty, as he acts like a true Gothic villain. But this part also contains one of the few hopeful instances in the entire story, when Cathy, the daughter of Catherine, educates Hareton and they fall in love, in a way re-establishing peace. However, the second generation doesn't appear in many adaptations, not just this one, and this is also a tradition started by the 1939 film. But the second part isn't completely erased in Fennell's film. But more on that later. The 1939 movie is also responsible for softening many crucial elements of this story. To begin with, Heathcliff is turned into a tragic victim who rarely reacts against the injustices he faces, which is a stark contrast to the cruel character we made in the book. Additionally, the 1939 movie cast a white actor as Heathcliff, ignoring the constant references to his ambiguous ethnicity. This tendency has been maintained in many adaptations, including the current one. People have rightfully complained about this. And regarding the controversy, Emerald Fennell explained that she saw a resemblance between Jacob Elordi and the image of Heathcliff that was in her first copy of Wuthering Heights. This justification felt weak in a time when there's less tolerance for whitewashing, especially after the 2011 adaptation directed by Andrea Arnold set a precedent by casting James Howson as Heathcliff. Also, the original adaptation has more of a melodramatic style compared to the book. For example, before passing away, Catherine looks like the decaying princess of a fairy tale, whereas in the book, she suffers from severe mental and physical health issues, which are described in scenes that are rather disturbing, like when she can't recognize herself in a mirror. In general, the efforts to transform this book into a less unsettling story can be understood considering the regulations that affected Hollywood at the time. The Hays Code was a strict set of moral guidelines enforced to ensure presentable content, and such a classic adaptation of Wuthering Heights created under this set of rules has affected the way the story has been told almost every time after that. But have the twists and turns of this new version gone too far? 50 Shades of Heathcliff. I definitely did not expect Joseph to have a sex scene. There is something about the structure of Wuthering Heights that makes it prone to loose adaptations. It's frame narrative. We don't read the main character's story through a first or third person narrator. Instead, we hear almost everything from Nellie, who tells the story to the new tenant of the Grange, Mr. Lockwood. Even though Nellie lived with Catherine and Heathcliff, this implies that there could have been many intimate scenes that she didn't witness. Additionally, the story and characters could have been transformed through Nellie's perspective, as many critics and the creators of this film consider her to be an unreliable narrator and even a villain. This creates an opportunity for whoever is adapting this story to create scenes between Cathy and Heathcliff that Nellie never saw. In a way, this has contributed to the significant variation we see from film to film. And for this one, some creative liberties have been taken. But to be honest, I'm a bit tired of people crying on the internet about inaccuracy when it's clear that the film doesn't intend to be accurate. I think it's more interesting to analyze what they've added to the story to try and understand their reasons. And I believe the most striking additions to this adaptation, the ones that have caused the most outrage, are the erotic scenes. Recently, explicit movies have experienced widespread success. Bodice rippers are not frowned upon anymore, and they have actually inspired one of the most successful shows of the past years. Wuthering Heights is not originally erotic, but it is undeniably passionate, and it has been framed by the film industry as a romance over and over again. So it was only a matter of time until it got explicit. So I can understand this steamy interpretation, but was it necessary? I'm not opposed to explicit content, but I believe it needs to serve a purpose. In this case, I think we have too many sex scenes whose only purpose is to please the audience. In the cinema, a woman literally said, "Finally," when Jacob took his shirt off. Unfortunately, the abundance of erotic scenes takes away the possibility of developing a strong emotional and spiritual bond between Catherine and Heathcliff. We do see them bonding in childhood, protecting each other in an abusive household. However, once they grow up, their interactions are very much physical. So emotion and spirituality are reduced in favor of eroticism, which I don't think honors the original. In this context, once again, Heathcliff is simplified into a devoted romance hero, and he is stripped of many of the characteristics that make him so interesting and relevant as a character. Here, he's kind of a perv, but he is far from the complex character that shows how a life of discrimination and violence can shape a person. Additionally, there comes a point in this movie when infidelity seems to be the main conflict, and this feels rather superficial compared to the themes that we read about in the book. So the film definitely has its flaws, but contrary to many people, I believe it also has its virtues. I think they interpreted the female characters in a very original and fresh perspective. In previous adaptations, Kathy remained fairly nice and innocent in comparison to the book. But in a time when we are so interested in strong or strange female characters, with the rise of enthusiasm for female rage, we've gotten a Catherine that seeks to honor the egotism and cruelty of the original character. There's also a strong focus on Nellie as a villain, but also as a woman in a complicated position who tries by whatever means to maintain a comfortable life. And then we have Isabella, who almost feels like a parody of an 18th century lady. She was very much a comic relief, but I think it worked. Her quirky and perverted personality was a fresh perspective in comparison with the typical victim figure, and it felt really aligned with the eccentric aesthetic of the film. And you can see the elements of the book that inspire this twist in the character. In a letter Isabella sends to Nellie, she writes, "Is Mr. Heathcliff a man? If so, is he mad? And if not, is he a devil? I shan't tell my reasons for making this inquiry." This last phrase suggests that it was a very intimate theme, which can be interpreted as a sexual matter. Of course, the character in the movie is far from suffering Heathcliff's atrocious actions as Isabella does in the book. Another element that people criticize, but honestly I quite liked, is how this version treated the second part of Wuthering Heights. While some people said it completely erases it, I think we can actually see some scenes inspired by it. For example, when Heathcliff sends letters to the Grange and Nellie burns them, or when young Kathy teaches Heathcliff how to read, which is inspired by her daughter and Hareton. One of the few widely praised elements of this movie is the cinematography. I wanted to mention particularly how the visual symbolism is very complex, and it succeeds at translating some of the themes of the novel, like the concern with heaven and hell, and the conception of Heathcliff as the devil, which is manifested, for example, in the scene where he lives with a background of red skies. Silly fanfiction for wine moms? So why are Wuthering Heights adaptations usually not considered faithful? I believe it's nearly impossible to combine the traditional love story interpretation that has widely influenced the general conception of this story since the release of the 1939 film with the book's complex storyline, atrocious characters, and sharp social and moral critique. But regarding this movie, is it just silly fanfiction or is it a new classic? Honestly, I believe some of the backlash Emerald Fennell has received is unfair. People on the internet seem to passionately hate her, and most times their justifications are unconvincing. Some of the criticism has a misogynistic tone, like when people dismiss the movie as a bodice ripper for wine moms. In one swift movement, they diminish the director and the public. And because of this, many are repeating mindless criticism, even before watching the movie, because they don't want to be perceived as the dumb girls who enjoy this movie. Much of the criticism I've read online, both from anonymous Twitter accounts and journalists from prestigious magazines, shows a powerful tendency toward online mob mentality and a weak understanding of Wuthering Heights and the history of its adaptations. I insist there has been valid and thoughtful criticism, but I think this time it has been the minority. So what do you think? Has this been an atrocious fanfiction or a fresh perspective on a classic? And why do people love to hate on this movie so much? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for your time.